Okay, so that makes 2 o'clock Eastern, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. I asked earlier for people to chime in, where they're joining our webinar today from, and I got answers from San Francisco all the way to Ontario. So we're in multiple countries, coast to coast, and haven't been with Knowify for a while. It's definitely just an awesome thing to see. And for today's topic, we're going to be covering labor costing and how to track the cost of your employees' time in Knowify. This is definitely a big part of job costing and a big part of what we do that our customers seem to really love. And so I'm happy that I can give a little bit more of a deep dive in on this topic uh, because what this webinar series that we're working on is all about, and I'm sure you got a little more information about this from Vin yesterday, is not just the high level training, but making sure that you're really experts in how to use different pieces of Knowify. And what I'd like to do next is introduce myself. For those of you who haven't spoken with me in the past, my name is Terrin Kalian. I lead our customer experience team and work with our product experts. So basically, anything that has to do with customers working with Knowify, that's where I come into play here. I've worked for Knowify for over 5 years now. Loved every second of it, and just really love helping contractors get on board the software and learn a little bit more about what we do. And what this demo will be covering today is first, how to set up your account and your users for time tracking. So, you have that information that goes into not just the actual process of tracking time, but making sure that your account is set to track time. We'll also be covering some scheduling, not the actual tracking of time, but assigning different tasks to your employees so that they know what they're supposed to be tracking time to. That's when we'll get into the actual tracking of hours, getting the time from the field into the office, and how that's going to be affecting your job costing. At the end of this, we'll be doing a Q&A. But if you have questions during the actual demonstration and training here, feel free to submit them in the Zoom Q&A because I'll be getting to all of those at the end. So that way, if you have the question mid-demo, you can put it in and we'll circle back to it when we're finished with the actual webinar. But what I'm going to do next is open up my Knowify account and show you all of this stuff firsthand. And as I said, what I'm going to do first is set up the users in my account and the jobs that we're going to be tracking our time to. And to set up our users, I'm going to go to my Knowify admin section. You'll see we have a tab called users. This is where we're going to be setting up different employees in our company, different people with access to Knowify. And it's going to be, basically adding names to our account. Where I start this process by coming to this users tab and clicking add user. We have a variety of different types of user that are available in Knowify. Regular access users are going to be people who log into this web application that we have in front of us. This is really meant for more people who need to not just track time, but enter in estimates, send proposals to customers, send invoices, log bills. But what we're going to be working with here is just labor tracking. So you can actually have mobile access to Knowify only users, which means they can access our smartphone app, but they don't actually have the ability to log into the Knowify web application that you use for all of your job costing and tracking purposes. For what it's worth, tomorrow I'll be having a webinar on specifically the smartphone app and how that works. So if you're interested in seeing more of that firsthand, I would definitely recommend joining that webinar as well. For this specific webinar, I'm just going to be using a user with no access to Knowify. Basically, this is our way of adding an employee that we track the time on their behalf. So if I have, I'm going to add Vin in here. So if I have Vin in my account as one of my users with no access, I have the ability to track his time. A foreman has the ability to track his time, but he actually can't enter it himself. And for the sake of this demonstration, that's all we're going to be needing. Next, it's going to ask for a role. These are the different types of users we have in our account. I'm actually going to call him a laborer. And basically what this means is when we're tracking our cost versus budget and we're tracking our, how many labor hours did we take versus how many did we budget, this just organizes into some more detailed reporting. So later on, when I'm looking at how the job did, it's going to show me how many labor hours does it take to complete this type of job. And I'll go ahead and add this user. But the next screen I want to go to is the rates section of our admin section. In the rates table here, we have the ability of adding what the cost per hour is for every employee in our system. And this is going to be the important part of getting that job costing that Knowify is so good at. And you can see that Vin's name was automatically added here. And I can plug in what his hourly rate is. And we can do it as a base rate. But then also on our growth and enterprise accounts, you'll get more information around benefits, taxes, insurance. And all of this goes in towards creating a loaded labor burden as our cost per hour. This rate could be added as hourly or yearly. I should also mention that. So if, let's say Vin makes 70,000 a year here, that's going to create a $35 an hour rate for him. That's just giving us the ability to track the cost of someone's time without them actually being an hourly employee. But I'm going to set this up as a hourly rate. And let's say at his base, he makes $40 an hour. And then we have benefits, taxes, and insurance, where I can put in, $2 in benefits, $7 in taxes, 10% on insurance. And so even though he's making $40 an hour, I can see that he's costing the company this $48.80 for every hour. And this is where the loaded labor burden costing really is going to come into play, is that this is our true cost to the job for every hour he spends. And it gives us a little bit more accurate information than if we had just used that initial 40. For users who are on our plus plans, I'll click this switch to simple rates table so you can see. This is what the basic table looks like. And for what it's worth, if you are using Knowify on one of these plans, you can always just calculate the time separately, what your hourly rate is going to be separately, and you can change it up here. So you can get more detailed as long as the cost per hour is looking like something you're comfortable with. That's what we're going to be using throughout your reports when it comes to job costing in Knowify. I'm going to go ahead and save these changes. And now I have my employee in the system. So what I want to get into next is how to add a job, since that's what we're going to be actually tracking the cost of in Knowify. So in my contract jobs table, I'm going to click add new contract job. And for those of you who have seen demonstrations of Knowify in the past, you're probably very familiar with these processes. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on these screens. But I'm going to use professional mode, which basically means that I'm going to budget before I quote a price to the client. This way, when I have my hours tracked against the job, it's not just here's how much we spent, but it's here's how much we spent versus our budget, so we can see how accurate we are when we're estimating the cost of a job in Knowify. Next, I'm also setting a job address. This is going to be useful for our employees on the smartphone app. It lets them know where they're supposed to be checking in every day. And it also lets us know if they're checking in at the job site when they actually start their time clock for the day, which is always very important as well. What I'm going to do is just make a very simple plan here that's just well enough set up that we can start tracking labor cost on the job. And with as with any plan, I'm going to click add job phase to start building here. I'm going to go ahead and call my first phase here site prep. And this is an important part of labor tracking in Knowify, is clicking this enable labor button on the phase. Once this is enabled, this phase is now findable on the smartphone app. And again, I'll be going into more detail on the smartphone app on tomorrow's demonstration. But this way I can actually, choose which phases are and aren't going to have labor tracked to them. So let's say hypothetically my framing phase isn't going to have employees tracking time. As long as I don't enable labor, this doesn't clutter their smartphone app with additional information that they may not need. And when I build a labor budget, I have two options. First option is to just plug in a dollar figure. Site prep is going to cost me probably $4,000 in labor. What I also like to do to get more information than just the dollar figure, when I enable labor, I can click this add role/resource button, and I can choose what types of workers I expect to see on this job. Then I can say how many total hours amongst everyone working is it going to take to complete this phase. So I could say, we'll probably need, let's call it 2 weeks of one foreman. So here's 80 hours of foreman time. And in total, I'm going to call it 320 labor hours. Now I'll be able to see not just how much we spent versus our $14,000 budget, but how many hours we spent versus what we expected. And that's going to be very useful information for if I ever need to do a similar project to this in the future. I'm just going to save this project plan now, and I'm going to go ahead and make it active. If this were more of the classic Knowify demonstration, this is where I would go into things like creating a proposal, sending quotes to the client. In this case, I really just want to focus on labor costing, so I'm going to jump to our next steps here. And I will get into scheduling in a second, but I just want to show the very simple way of getting your labor cost on a job if you don't want to go into too much detail of the rest of Knowify's features. Let's say I have time that I want to apply to the site prep phase here. If I expand labor and I click this drop down menu, I can click enter time, and it pulls us into the foreman view, which I'll be covering in a little bit more detail in a bit. But basically, what this is giving me the option for is the ability to just enter hours for employees and have that added to the job without me having to go through scheduling to have them on the smartphone app. It's just a good way to manually get information into the system. Uh, but rather than us doing it too manually, I'm going to jump into the scheduling module so you can see a little bit more about how all of this side of Knowify works. First, what we're looking at is the corporate calendar. This is going to be a way for me to not schedule employees, but set dates to the job. So if I want, I can say we have a new job that starts today. It's that job 1746. The site prep starts today, and it should take 3 days. This way, I'm not just seeing, who's scheduled on the job and when they're scheduled on it, but I can see what jobs are we working on this week. So it's a little bit more of high level information about this project. For growth and enterprise accounts, you have access to the job board. But what I'd like to show here is the resource board, which is available on all price levels. This is going to be our simple scheduling tool that lets us just take jobs on the left and assign them to our employees here on the right. I can see right now I have a blank schedule, so I want to actually start adding things here. I'm going to bring up that 1746 again. I'm going to take site prep, and I'm going to assign it to George's schedule starting today. You can see that that automatically fills in the job for me and the date, and I can make adjustments as necessary. We want them starting today and working till Friday, and I can add more employees at this time if I need. This way, we have the whole schedule being set up all in just one screen, so I don't have to jump around between, add individual jobs to each person's schedule every day. If it's the same crew that's being scheduled all at once, we even group them together for you to make it a little bit easier for you to manage all of this. Also, if I click this notify scheduling change option before I click add new allocation, this sends them a push notification with more information about what they're scheduled on, where we expect them to go, what type of work they're doing. And it goes right to their smartphone app, so they can open that up and get all of the detailed information there as well. Again, this does make the whole process of tracking time easier from the smartphone app. But it also makes it easier for those of us who are entering the time on the web browser. So I'm going to open up this time tracker module here on the left-hand side of Knowify. This is going to be where we manage the hours that are plugged into Knowify. And the first landing screen is this overview screen where I can see the 8 hours that have been submitted for my employee Amadeus. And if I want to expand this to see all of my resources at once. I have that option too. I like to filter it out and make it a little bit more organized. I only want to see the employees who have submitted time this week. But to get more time entries into the system, I'm going to click the enter time screen here. And I'm going to enter time I'm going to choose George since he was the initial person I scheduled. And you can see that the project 1746 automatically popped up here, specifically the site prep phase, which makes it easier for me to just plug in hours for him. And so you can see how even when we are manually entering time for employees, it makes it easier for us to enter time if they're scheduled on jobs. If you don't see the job that you want to enter time for here, that's where I can click this add new activity button. So I could say 1746 again. And last time I was just entering time for site prep, but I can here click framing, submit, and now I have time that's all against the same job, but I can split what phase of the job it's against as well. So I have the ability to track all of my time in a little bit more detail that way. So this is the enter time view where we're choosing an employee and pulling up different jobs. But what might be more useful for you if you're doing manual entry on the browser is to use the Formant view. This is where I have the option of saying 1746, site prep, and it pulls up a list of my employees instead of it pulling up a list of jobs. So I can actually just choose the job first and then plug in the time for each employee as we go. Once I submit this, that'll add to the job, but I'm also going to add some time for a different phase. And again, you can see that once we have the job selected, I can toggle between different phases. And this is a really important part of our labor costing, is not just seeing how much we're spending on the job, but on each individual phase of the job as well. So I can see, why this job is taking me more or less time than I expected, why it's costing me more or less than I expected. It's all just going to be reported on based off of the hours that I'm submitting here. And I'm going to get some hours in for my employee VIN that I added earlier too. And all of this is going into our review time section. And I'll cover that in a second, but I also do want to cover this check-in and check-out view. This is where we'll see time entries that were submitted via the smartphone app. So I could see that today, Paul checked in on 1650. He was doing framing, and I could see that he checked in at the job site. And if I click this, it'll actually give me the location of their check-in, and it gives me more information other than just checked in at 11:39. I could see where this person was at 11:39 today. They have the ability to check themselves out, but let's just say someone forgets. Once I check this employee out, it submits the hours for them, and it automatically adds that to the job. And this is how we're really getting that real-time job costing. With every time entry that every employee submits, it's giving us an update on, how much we've spent based off of how much time was spent at the job site each day. This is also the screen where you can make adjustments. So I manually checked this employee out, but I could say he actually checked out too early. He must have clicked the button by mistake. And I can add more hours, subtract hours. It just gives us a little bit more control over the time before it's all approved. This is also where you can manually check someone in. So let's say Vin forgot to check himself in this morning. I can click Vin. 1746 is the job we've been using. I could say he's working on framing, and he checked in today at 9 a.m. And now he has the ability to check himself out on the smartphone app when he logs in today. But all these hours are going to now go to our review time section. This is where I can see everything that's been submitted. I can filter out specific time ranges. I can filter out specific jobs. And this is where I'll be able to also do things like edit the time that's been submitted. So let's say I see that George submitted this time towards site prep. I want to click edit and say, well, he was on the right job, but he chose the wrong phase. I can add that to framing now instead. So all of our job costing is more accurate. It's also where I can delete entries. So if anything was made in error, I could just say, click this entry, more action, delete. This is useful for if people accidentally hit check-in and check-out immediately. They submit a 5-minute entry to start their day. Things like that happen from time to time, so you get the option of removing them as necessary. You can also make a mass adjustment of different time entries here. So I'm going to take a couple of these other site prep time entries here. And under more actions, click allocate to job. This way, if multiple employees made the same type of mistake, I could say, take all of these, add them to framing instead. And it just makes the adjustment for us all at once. So I don't need to worry about, manually going into each one and adjusting. And then to approve entries, it's as easy as just checking the box next to all of the corresponding entries and clicking this green approve time button. What this does is, first of all, it adds these time entries to our payroll reports and all of our different time reports that we run. And then if you're using QuickBooks for your payroll and you need to get the time from Knowify's timesheet into the QuickBooks timesheet, approving time will push it into QuickBooks as well. Another thing I'd like to highlight briefly, I won't go into too much detail on this, but it's our ability to split time into overtime and double time. You can set up rules in your account and Knowify will automatically split into time and a half and double time for your job costing purposes. I will mention though that the overtime split feature is only available in enterprise plans right now. And if you have any questions on that, don't hesitate to reach out to our support team to learn more about upgrading. Once I approve time, I'm going to go back to that project to see how it's now affected our job costing. I'll open up 1746. I'm going to go to my plan and track section. Just one thing I always like to highlight is that plan and track is going to be our cost side of Knowify. So since we consider labor to be an hour cost factor in Knowify, it's something that we don't have to worry about the contract management in this point in time. And you'll see that the job has now cost me $3,900 out of my $18,000 budget. But then more importantly, I could see it at each phase of the job as well. And this is a big part of, when we're selecting which phase, when time tracking, when we're scheduling. So I don't just see, how much we're spending on the job, but what parts of the job cost us more and less money than we expected. And then beyond that, not just the dollar figure, but if I expand framing, I could see how many hours we're spending on each role. Remember when we set up Vin, we labeled him as a laborer. This is how we know that his 8 hours were part of our laborer hours, the 320 that we had budgeted, and not the foreman hours that Paul has been tracking against. A lot of the benefit of having this reporting of 64 spent versus 320 budgeted is that pay rates are going to vary a lot over the course of time, but the amount of time it takes to complete things is usually a little bit more consistent. So this way, if all of these employees were to get a raise, I would still be able to see how many hours it's going to take me to complete this, even if it means it's going to cost me more money at the end of the day. And so that's always a big benefit of using Knowify, is getting this cost versus budget and these hours spent versus hours estimated reporting. Other than that, that's the basics of what I like to cover when it comes to labor costing. Again, tomorrow's webinar will be more heavily focused on the smartphone app, which is going to be the main point of entry for a lot of companies' time entries. But what I'm going to do next is jump into the Q&A portion of this webinar. So the first question I had is, my scheduling module does not have the resource board. This would be tremendously useful. How do I get this? Awesome question. All you have to do is email support@knowify.com, and we are happy to enable it for you. Resource board cannot be enabled at the same time as job board. And a lot of times if you upgrade to a growth or an enterprise account, will automatically give you the job board as part of it. But that doesn't mean that you're stuck with the more advanced scheduling tool. It just means that you have the option of selecting between the two. So if you email support@knowify.com, request that resource board is enabled in your account, we're happy to help you out with that. Someone asked, can we show resource board again? I'll go ahead and pull that up very quickly. That's job board. So the question asked, I have resource day, but it's only one resource at a time. The idea behind resource board is that you don't have to schedule one employee at a time. You'll see that the input is very similar, where I still am, having that same add allocation feature. But instead of me doing one employee's timesheet or one employee's schedule at a time, I have the option of selecting multiple. And then aside from just scheduling here, we can actually drag items around in the resource board. So let's say I have this set up for today, but I want to move it to tomorrow. I can click, drag it to tomorrow, and then updates their schedule, and it gives them more information on the smartphone app. If you have more questions and would like to set up a one-on-one session on specifically scheduling, just let me know, and I'm always happy to find some time to show you a little bit more around that specifically. We could even do a webinar in this series on just scheduling, probably. When the next question was, what data comes over to QuickBooks and how can it be used for accounting purposes in terms of our labor cost? So when you sync your time from Knowify to QuickBooks, all we send is the employee and the number of hours. Actually, let me correct myself. We send the employee the number of hours and the job that they worked on and the service item. This way, you can use the QuickBooks timesheet to then run payroll. As far as accounting for labor cost, I mean, Knowify is going to give you the labor burden on jobs. If you want to see your total labor cost in your accounting system, that might be run through running reports through your payroll software, which would probably integrate with them. But that would be a different type of labor costing because that's your company's labor costing as opposed to your project-based labor costing. The job board does not allow you to quickly see if your employees are allocated for the week, only to see the jobs. So one feature that is maybe a little bit too hidden on the job board, but I'd like to show you a little bit more about kind of how this works. You'll see these little colored dots next to different employees on the job board. What that lets you do is see if the employees are scheduled within the visible time frame. And if I want to get more granular, if I click on Wednesday, the colored dot will show me what everyone's scheduled on Wednesday. I'll click on Tuesday since I know no one's scheduled there. You see it removes the dots to show me that this is the full list of people who aren't scheduled on Tuesday. So if I click on Thursday and say, looks like these guys all need a job, I can assign them to something that's in the calendar. And now I have confirmation that on Thursday everyone is working on something or scheduled on something, and so that gives us a little bit more visibility. The follow-up to that was, is it possible to have both the job board and the resource board active? Unfortunately, at this point in time, we only enable one or the other. Basically, because the two can technically have conflicting information, we are trying to avoid any kind of issues assigning employees jobs where one person's working in the job board assigning something to one person and someone else is in the resource board assigning them to something else, and then it gives them two different pieces of information on their smartphone app, which we don't want to have that type of issue. So you can only have one or the other, but if you're on a growth or an enterprise plan, just let us know which one you prefer. If you want to switch back and forth between the two, just let us know. Whatever you prefer is what we think you should be using. Next question was, how are we allocating overhead time? Also a very good question here, because you don't want to have employees only track job cost in one system and then track their overhead costs in another system. So you can build what we call internal projects. This is a way, and you'll actually see my first example here is called shop time. This is a way for you to build a project that's not associated with a customer, that you can still have all of the same functionality as you would on a normal project. So you can set up shop time, travel time, vacation time, anything like this, and associate time with this project instead of your client project, so it doesn't throw off any of your job costing. Let's see, here's a bit of a long one. Have you heard of any updates to the sync issues with QuickBooks on labor reflecting to a job? When it comes to actually getting so this is more about payroll and how QuickBooks manages payroll once the time is in there. It looks like this person actually has contacted QuickBooks support and they have several tickets open for it. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to work with them on this. We would help you if we could, but it might be outside of our scope of what we can do. Where will the labor time show up in QuickBooks when it's pushed over after being approved in Knowify? So QuickBooks Online has a weekly timesheet. It's not actually their payroll. It's just a place for you to have hours entered in Knowify. And that's where the time shows up. We do have several guides on this if you're interested in learning more. I can't pull up my QuickBooks account right now, but if you say, sync hours with QBO, well, somewhere in here, you can learn more about where in QuickBooks all this time goes and how to get it in correctly. And here's the QuickBooks weekly timesheet. We have a question following up on the overhead question about would we be using service items. So using service items for time tracking in Knowify actually isn't limited to just overhead, but when you're creating phases, you'll see that the naming is actually going to suggest different service items. Like earlier I did site prep. If I select a service item when naming a phase, then all time that is submitted against this phase is going to use that service item when the time makes it into QuickBooks. And let's see if I can open this up a little bit bigger. I'm not 100% sure, but I have service items turned off in this case. But there will be another item here. Actually, no, here it is. So I have this one set up to track to labor, but you can get more specific where if I use that site prep item to name a phase, then when it syncs to my QuickBooks account, it's going to call it site prep here. So that's where you can get more detail in your sync of hours from Knowify to QuickBooks. The next question here was, what if a technician forgot to enter his time? Any way to confirm what time he left the job site? So at this point in time, we only show location when employees punch in and when they punch out. So what I would recommend doing is checking the check-in and check-out view in the morning and confirming that everyone's punched in. And then at the end of the day, if there's still someone checked in, you might want to follow up with them. Or in a case like this, I can manually check them out if I don't think that they're actually going to be submitting their time. It's aside from that, you can actually set up reminders. And let me see if I can pull this up for the smartphone app. And this is something I can cover in more detail tomorrow. But this will actually send a push notification to your employees and say, I want to remind them to check in at 8 a.m. every day, and I want to remind them to check out at 5 p.m. And then this will push notification right to their phone, regardless of whether or not they're checked in, just as a reminder. So if they forgot, it gives them a little bit of a nudge to check out at the end of the day there. There's a question about pulling up a P&L for a job in QBO to show how labor is showing sync from Knowify. When we push time to your QuickBooks account, it actually doesn't push with a dollar figure because the weekly timesheet won't accept a dollar figure in this type of sync. So that's something where your P&L for a job is always going to be held in Knowify. That's really the idea, is that Knowify is the job costing software, whereas QuickBooks is more of a back-end accounting software. But the benefit of this is that we actually have much more granular job costing and reporting in Knowify than QuickBooks Online currently offers, even with their projects feature. And so you're still going to be able to have all of that reporting. I could see here 1742 is showing my current profitability. It's showing me how much of that revenue is billed versus how much am I seeing as work in progress. For what it's worth, that's something that could be disabled. I know a lot of people don't prefer to see that as reported revenue. And you can see that it's even giving me, here's my current labor cost versus budget. And just like I showed you in the webinar earlier, you get really granular reporting on what's making up this labor cost every step of the way. So I could see how many hours were spent, how many were budgeted, and it's how much it's costing my company. End of project, can Knowify sync with QuickBooks to see the actual labor versus budget? So again, I mean, the labor costing, all of the cost versus budget information is only held in Knowify, because we are the job costing platform when it comes to managing projects in Knowify. So QuickBooks still gets the hours, so you could do things like run payroll. You can still track your all of your expenses. How much am I spending with the current vendor? How much am I spending on a specific employee? You can run that through your payroll expenses. But Knowify is going to be the sole place where you're seeing cost versus budget and then profit or loss on a job. I have, since Knowify will be our choice for P&L reports, are there plans for an allocation feature to be turned on for invoice entry? Currently, my understanding is that there is only a default choice by vendor. So when you're invoicing, so I'm not sure if we're referring to vendor bills and managing hours that you're being billed for from vendors, or invoicing customers. One thing that we will be covering is time and materials invoicing. So if you're referring to invoicing customers for hours, that's something we'll be getting into more detail on later. I believe next week is when we do our time and materials webinar. If that's something you want to submit a follow-up to, maybe I didn't answer that one correctly. Vendor bills. So I mean, if you have a vendor who bills you per the hour, then we actually don't even really consider this to be labor cost as much as it's subcontractor cost. And you can log a bill for the number of hours, and that'll show up in the subcontractor category here. And another thing we'll be covering in another Pro Series webinar is how to track the cost of subcontractors in Knowify. So I would definitely recommend looking into that as well. There's a question about Knowify taking in API information. I mean, we right now integrate with T-Sheets, and we have a way that you can import time from ClockShark. That's our only option when it comes to integrating other time tracking systems with Knowify. We'll be expanding, as we move on, probably over the next couple of years. But for right now, it's the only solution that we have. If a role is deleted, what happens to open contracts with roles budgeted with that role? To the best of my knowledge, we don't allow you to delete a role that's in use. You have to actually take the role out of every part of Knowify where it's currently active before you delete it. And then, at that point, it'll just remove it from wherever it's set up as a budget, because there wouldn't be a budget from there anymore since you've already removed it. There's a question about the CRM tab. This is something that's a testing feature in my account. If you're looking to use a CRM with Knowify, I would recommend looking into Zapier integration. We have a lot of great videos on that in our YouTube channel, where we can show you how to integrate with different CRMs. I believe we use Pipedrive as the example in our YouTube channel. But Zapier integration can make it a little bit easier for you to manage your client list in a different software, and then have that sync to Knowify when you're ready to actually proceed with a project. Might be a little bit better of a way to keep everything a little bit more organized. Supplies purchased for a billable job versus supplies service purchased for service or shop use. Same idea when it comes to using internal projects. Um, Again, I'd like to focus a little bit more on labor costing when it comes to this webinar. But if you want to, uh, go into if you want to learn more about a job being billable and having supplies that you spend money on and then you invoice the customer on, next week we will be doing a webinar on time and materials contracts and invoicing, where we'll go into more detail on how that works. Could you clarify if there is a feature on the job board to visually see a dependency as the project progresses? When it comes to our scheduling and dependencies, you can set up dependencies in your plan and track Gantt chart. If I come here and I say view Gantt chart, I can say something like site prep. I'm going to link the end of site prep to the beginning of framing. And what this does is it makes it so back in my project plan, when I switch site prep to closed, and this could be done from the smartphone app by marking a job as complete, this will email everyone who's scheduled on framing because the start of framing is dependent on the finish of site prep. So when site prep is marked as finished, it emails everyone scheduled on framing to say, you're now good to start this project because this phase, because the previous phase has been marked as complete. And that's really how our dependency management works in Knowify. At this point in time, it's a little bit more simple like that, but we'll be expanding and making it a little bit more advanced as the time goes on. I believe that's the last of our questions. I'm going to pull up the chat just to confirm. And it looks like it's a lot of the same questions that we had from our Q&A. Perfect. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join in today. One last question coming in. Is the ability to have skills, attributes for each person under development? Not at this point in time. I would say the best way to do that is to have different roles where different roles imply different skills are available. So you could see, how many labor hours spent versus budgeted. It's kind of going to give you that information of, people in the labor role skill set. How many of these does it take to satisfy the budget here? And I think that's kind of your best alternative. Thank you everyone again for joining in. Definitely recommend joining for tomorrow's webinar on the smartphone app. It's going to cover a lot more detailed information on how to track time, how to enter purchases from the field, how to enter comments, upload images of the job site, and then also how to use our Formant features where employees can track time for other employees if you have users with no access, and then one foreman is going to be tracking time for the rest of them. This webinar, like all of our webinars, will be on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to follow up with anything you saw here, if you would like to view it again, send it to someone else in your company for learning, feel free to check out our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to reference it again there. Thanks again, everyone, for your time, and have a nice rest of your day.